In this video, I will get into the creepy administration of John F. Kennedy. Now, these men were the government. It was not really JFK who came up with the policy and all of that. I've posted a previous video about the assassination and what it truly meant. JFK was a normal president and had normal enemies, organized crime, and people somehow related to foreign policy. For example, very angry Iraqis and so on and so forth. So it's not uncommon, to have assassination attempts in the United States, and even JFK's father almost got blown up, when a bombing happened against Wall Street. I was explaining in the previous video how I don't really see a clear motive for these powerful circles to which JFK belonged himself. This was his brotherhood. I don't see a motive why this powerful group would ever assassinate him. It makes no sense. You see the mythology of JFK, the rebel, and he was, against the military-industrial complex and against the CIA, but none of that is really true. He was a very normal president. He was for military buildup. He was for making more weapons. He was a big fan of covert operations, unless of course they failed, and so on and so forth. So there was no real rebellion. It's also not true that he wanted to change the monetary system and just change the central bank or something. That is a myth. That is not true. And he also did not give a speech against the Illuminati. This was just a speech against communism. So you really do not find a motive for the most powerful circles to get rid of him. And even if there had been a motive, why not do it in a more elegant fashion? JFK was surrounded by, very influential people. It was always a possibility or an opportunity to get rid of him in a more elegant fashion and not have a spectacular event in Dallas. So this is just the baseline. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the cabinet, the administration, and who these people actually were, who really made the policy. Because JFK himself was replaceable. He was one of many people. And this is how the American system is built. So if a president just, isn't no more, it doesn't really change anything about the system. And so, for example, we have Sergeant Shriver. He was the one who picked the people for the administration. This wasn't even JFK's own choices. So Shriver visited the elite University of Yale. He was a member of the secret societies there. Was a founding member of the group America First Committee, a giant group, and they did not want America to join Second World War. So the entire America First Committee was the project of these Yale people. And it looks like this was just a big deception against the Germans, by having these people, talk that way in public. The Germans thought that, America would not join the war. But once Pearl Harbor happened, the AFC just vanished into thin air. That's how that went. And Shriver, he was also joining the U.S. Navy himself, was serving for 5 years. And this is something you find over and over again in the JFK administration. So these people were pre-selected. They were from trustworthy families, but they also had to be smart, go to these elite universities, and they also had to prove their loyalty and prove they were able or willing to take risks for the group. And usually they were decorated with the highest military orders, even though it's questionable if they really always deserved those medals. Then we had Ted Sorensen. He was basically writing all the famous speeches for Kennedy. So if you remember any, Kennedy speeches or fragments out of it. This was basically Ted Sorensen. This was not Kennedy himself. Sorensen almost became a CIA director, but there was a problem. Apparently, Ted Sorensen sort of covered up an incident with Senator Ted Kennedy. Kennedy ran his car into I think it was a pond, and a woman died in that incident, and Kennedy was just leaving the scene and didn't report what had happened. And so Sorensen kind of covered for this, and that's how he didn't end up as CIA director. Then we have McGeorge Bundy, National Security Advisor, member of CFR, Skull and Bones, and the Ford Foundation. Yikes. He also had joined the U.S. Army. He was involved in intelligence work. He became an analyst at the CFR in New York. He was hanging with people like Dwight Eisenhower, future CIA Director Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and so on and so forth. And Bundy was essential for the policy, the foreign policy, and the security policy. And so this included the Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuba rocket crisis, Vietnam War. Bundy was for the Vietnam War, and he was for deploying hundreds of thousands of ground troops, and he was for the bombardment of North Vietnam. He was also one of those guys, along with CIA people, who were for the coup d'état against President Diem. All those operations that happened. Right. So McGeorge Bundy was the big guy, for foreign policy. So it wasn't really JFK's foreign policy. Then we have Arthur Schlesinger. He, Harvard professor, was serving in the predecessor of the CIA. He was friendly with Skull and Bones members, friendly with Henry Kissinger, Nelson, Rockefeller, Robert McNamara, and McGeorge Bundy. Finance Minister C. Douglas Dillon from the very creepy bank of Dillon, Reed & Co. He served in World War II in Guam, Saipan, Philippines, became a lieutenant commander of the Navy, decorated with the Legion of Merit and the Air Medal. And so he was a guy who was more aligned with, Republicans. So he was a very traditional guy in that way. And he was supposed to calm the nerves of people out there, that he wasn't going to do anything stupid with, the economy. So again, not really JFK's policies there. C. Douglas Dillon was a close friend of John D. Rockefeller III. He served as a leader of the Rockefeller Foundation, and so on and so forth. Attached to Council on Foreign Relations, etc., etc. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. He was a captain in the USAAF, served in World War II, Office of Statistical Control. They were analyzing bombing campaigns, planning better or more efficient bombing campaigns. And McNamara was running the Pentagon how he wanted. So this became very clear between McNamara and President Kennedy. So he basically told Kennedy, I'm gonna, choose the people for the Pentagon, and I'm gonna run this the way I see fit. And Kennedy was okay with it. So on and so forth. Of course, the whole Vietnam thing, and more very important decisions, by Robert McNamara. This was not JFK, and there was no rebellion by JFK and his brother. So they didn't rebel against anything really. Of course, you had discussions about Vietnam. In the earlier stages, should the United States get involved more? Should it be low involvement, mid-size involvement, or large involvement? There were always several people who had different opinions, and also with the covert operations. The Kennedys were big fans of covert operations. When things didn't go as planned, of course they were getting angry, but this was very normal. and also these calls for rearranging the intelligence sphere. This was also very common in America because there was no perfect playbook how to structure different intelligence agencies and delegate these tasks. So this was just very common arguments, and this was not a rebellion of the Kennedys against Black Ops. For example, you can read a lot about this in Wiener's book on the CIA. He was looking at all these files, and he gives you a much clearer picture about the Kennedys. Then we had Dean Rusk, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, was serving as an officer in the China-Burma-India Theater, Legion of Merit, worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, and was not the first choice of JFK. JFK wanted J. William Fulbright, who was also very, very pro-British, and so on and so forth. And there were more guys like this. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a guy like that. LBJ had somewhat of a military background, and also the Minister for the Interior had a military background, and they were all team players. They all had proven they were willing to take physical risks, and just prove themselves to the team, the brotherhood. So when you look at the assassination, so many decades later, right, we do not see a clear motive. And I've looked deep and hard. I'm aware of all the stuff that's been published about the assassination. I just do not see a clear motive. And by sort of faking a motive, which has been done quite a bit, especially from the left and traditional conspiracy media, by faking a motive for the assassination, for the establishment to get rid of Kennedy, by doing so, I think this is just meant to placate the audience, because this implies that there was a hero, a rebel in the White House, that it was possible for a rebel hero to even make it to the White House. It's a very romantic, maybe even naive view. The reality, I think, is much, much more harsh. So what about the cover-ups right after the assassination? So you probably heard of all the stuff with Oswald and the autopsy and the grassy knoll, where there are more shooters and all of that stuff. And you have to remember how the system works. The assassination attempts happen. Many groups out there want to kill a sitting president, organized crime. Iraqis and many other groups out there, radical communists, and so on and so forth. So when something happens, it's standard operating procedure to keep as much as possible secret, and it's just the way things work, because the United States system does not want transparency when it comes to events like this. They just want to keep the cards close to themselves. They don't want to reveal, what the details were. And I think this is what happened with the Kennedy assassination. So, Oswald was not very bright, but he was a very active, person. So he voluntarily went to the Soviet Union and came back, and he wanted to insert himself into activism. He wanted to basically become a spook and infiltrate stuff and become a big shot, but that never really materialized. There was also another assassination attempt, apparently, by Oswald. He wanted to kill a right-wing military officer who was also a member of the Birch Society, who was controlling conspiracy media at the time. These things happen, and so, yes, there were contacts of Oswald to, the KGB, and there were Oswald's contacts to Western, American intelligence, because they were viewing him as a potential spy, potential threat, this and that. And when the assassination happened, all this backstory, which was not a spectacular backstory, it was a very normal, everyday, intelligence business. All this backstory became a public relations problem, and the American system did not want the world to believe that the KGB assassinated Kennedy, or the Soviet Union assassinated Kennedy. And it was just, the system did not want people to get into all this FBI, CIA stuff, because that's just was not in the interest of the system at all. So I think this is why many aspects were covered up. So the official narrative is just this lone nut shot the president, and that was it. And now, of course, the standard interpretation of the lone nut, the standard interpretation oftentimes comes with something else attached to it, which is baloney, namely the view that the American system is totally fine. You can't really criticize it. It's very open and transparent. And if you do think something is fundamentally wrong with the United States system, especially political system or power system, if you think anything's really wrong with it, then you're weird, you're suspicious, and you could be potentially a terrorist like Oswald. So this is something that we see quite a bit. Sometimes it's verbalized explicitly, sometimes it's more implicit. But this is kind of the regular view. Lone nut, and if you think the system has big problems, then you're weird and you're a suspect. Of course, that's not reality. And so of course it's not just communists, regular communists that are a problem. Instead, you have a political system in America that is dominated by family connections, and it's also dominated by secret organizations and secret methods. So this is not what the United States is supposed to be. We're supposed to have transparency so that people really look deep and hard at these political candidates, and people choose wisely, and so on and so forth. But as you saw with the administration, it's a very secretive system, and it has its own rules. And so this circle, they pick the candidates, and they can dominate the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, you saw these cabinet members, and they could serve under a Republican president, they could serve under Democrat presidents. It doesn't matter to these people. And JFK's father was quite the fascist, or at least he play acted the fascist, back in the day, when it was, the agenda to deceive the Germans. But Daddy paid for JFK's political campaigns, spent quite a bit of money, and that's how that went. You have to be aware of that. And so the father was super right-wing, basically, but he groomed his son to be a slick anti-communist. A real anti-communist, but who is marketed better. So wouldn't cause so much outcry in public, right? So if you look at JFK himself and, the little decisions that he actually made, or, what policy that he influenced, if any. If you look at JFK, he was a very baseline president and did nothing out of the ordinary, and was not a rebel, wasn't even much of a leftist, to be honest. And so that was that, So the big conspiracy is not the assassination or, the cover-ups that happen afterwards. The big conspiracy is basically the political system, and these Yale networks like Skull and Bones. I mean, I was tracing them back to British intelligence or aristocratic intelligence, the real old intelligence networks. And you can find material on that on this channel. You can also buy my English book about the royal cryptocracy. So it's not rocket science, really. These older empires that were really, really large, like the British one, these large empires back then also needed large intelligence networks and capabilities. And that's just how that went. So they didn't have these monolithic bureaucratic entities like you would have today, but intelligence was still very, very large. And most people have never really looked at this. And you have like these old British networks. in America, like Skull and Bones, and they basically ran the JFK administration, and these networks also dominate the Republican sphere. So this is where you have to look. So don't get worked up over the assassination and, you know, the little cover-ups that happened. You know, that's not really where you can find the big secrets. That's not really where you should spend your energy on, because, you know, for an intelligence analyst, they always have to anticipate where to spend your resources, where to spend your time. So you can spend your whole life digging into the details of Oswald and his contacts, but that doesn't really get you anywhere. So you should rather spend your energy and your resources on the networks that truly ran the JFK administration. Please subscribe to this channel, comment on this video, like it, and share our content.